Criminals and masterminds, this is internet personality Vangelus, and the other fresh deluxe in Wave 1 of Trans5mer's Premier Edition pieces is another Decepticon. Berserker brings back that old 2011 Dread aesthetic, and boy do I have egg on my face for not having my crankcases here in Toronto to show alongside him. At least Olaf here has his metal face. You've just gotta unearth him from all the layers of Premier Edition packaging to get to it. With his four-clawed thumbs, flowing metal dreadlocks, digitigrade legs, and mostly backpacked vehicle mode components, Berserker cuts a surprisingly fine figure once you get him properly arranged and stood up on the tabletop. The toy could have been a hunched and squatty mess, and, well, he can be if you want, but I'm not cruel. He's got enough range to stand all tall and sexy, too. And that backpack, as much as it foreshadows some shell-ass, shell-based transformation, it folds up tight and clean. Unfortunately, the best way I can describe his paintwork is to say that I spent a good long time thinking that pics of the finished figure were pics of an unfinished factory test shot. He does have paint, but the effect of gunmetal next to gray plastic ends up really bland, despite cool stuff like red gradients. At least the messy red X on his chest is actually a weird and screen-accurate thing for his myriad appearances in the film. The bright side is that in person, the plastic and paint colors play a little more naturally, and often find a unifying shine under the right kind of light. The fresh downside is that his weapon storage is absolutely comical. The violent sticks are supposed to hook onto his backpack. They do. And then, they fall off. I haven't found a magic spot that locks them in tightly, so I usually just put them in his hands. And he sure seems to be a lot more Skrelnik when he's waving his obscenely violent cudgels around. Berserker's head is on a ball socket joint, but the bottom of his neck is on a hinge to allow his head to kind of hunch, if you prefer that look. This also means at the top here, his head, when it looks left and right, it has to tilt a little bit, and if it's down here, it can look a little more directly left and right. He can also, tilt his head like that. He can look up and down. It's pretty good neck articulation for a dread. His little dread shoulder claw things can wiggle because they're on ball socket joints. His shoulders are also on ball socket joints. They can swing around, stick out. The transformation joint allows them to pivot up and down to your taste. Again, if you want this guy to be a little more hench and monstrous. He's got bicep swivels. He's got a single elbow joint with a 90-degree bend. His wrists don't have any dedicated articulation, but if you move this down and untransform his wrist a little bit, it allows him to point his death clubs forward a little bit. So I find that kind of helpful for some poses I want to do. There's no waist joint. There is technically an ab crunch, although I don't get much out of this due to the nature of the backpack and the butt flap and everything. But it is there. His hips are ball socket joints, so he can kick. He can kick, man! As for outward motion, there's not a ton. That's about it, because the wheels will bump into his waistline. He's got thigh swivels on a mushroom peg. And then he's got a single knee joint here, with pretty good range of motion. Depending on how digitigrade you want things to be. I think that still is pretty good. And then if you untransform his ankle, you can straighten it out a little bit if you don't want the digitigrade look entirely. Although you probably should, because his toes don't have any joints to speak of. His heel flaps can move, but this one is way loose. This one's got a little bit of detenting to it. So I've been able to get this to be used as kind of like a stilt. This one, not so much. It tends to just collapse under weight when I use it. So, this dude, for a kind of hunchbacked, digitigrade movie Decepticon, I found him surprisingly posable. I've gotten some real good, like, hip-thrusty, tilt-the-head-down, sultry kind of postures out of him. And, it's making me feel things I didn't know I would feel for a predator-faced, dreadlocked, claw-shouldered robot. Or, maybe I just solved my own mystery. Berserker's transformation is pretty cool in concept. His arms form the rear axles, and his legs pull a non-movie lockdown to massively compress his size, and also form the bottom edges of the sides of the vehicle. The backpack erupts into most of the recognizable alt mode after a quick ab crunch, and then the tabbing begins. Remember Titan's Return Wheelie? Remember how his transformation works but mostly relies on tab slot connections that feel often mushy and insecure to varying degrees from figure to figure? Multiply that issue once or twice and you have the Berserker experience. This is not fun to do on my copy of the toy. Even his tightest tabs feel more like support tabs than main locking tabs, and unless I do things very specifically and carefully, I usually end up spinning a crumply and panel-liney van around in my hands multiple times, trying to clean up one spot only to break apart another on the other side. His weapon storage even adds to this, as the club's squishy nature sometimes means pushing them up into place also busts open a tab slot connection somewhere else on the vehicle. Whatever the case, once you get here, you'll quickly see that his love for you is like a truck. Berserker. Because he compresses down very impressively into the kind of alt mode I associate with the on-screen dreads. A spooky government-style SUV van type of thing with red lights on top. Not only are those lights painted, so are the ones on the front and the back, as are all the windows. This is pretty solid stuff for 2017. The wheels have plenty of rolling clearance, even with the weapons stored on the underbelly, leaving Berserker's vehicle mode with only one major flaw outside of its haphazardly panel-oriented construction. It looks really small next to other relevant deluxes. Barricade's car mode kinda dwarfs him, as does B/Stinger's. The only silver lining here is that Berserker does manage to look alright next to the Voyager Optimus Prime's alt mode. Such is the price paid for impressive faux mass shifting, I guess. Berserker's insecure transformation is a loud, terrible deal killer. I've heard that, like Wheelie, there are some copies of the toy that hold together better than others, but boy does it seem like fragile Berserker vans are the most common outcome going by feedback online. It's a real shame, because despite his vehicular smallness, I otherwise like a lot of stuff going on in this figure. The robot mode won me over in ways I never expected once I got Berserker unboxed and actually messed around with him in person. His body language can go so much farther beyond squat and hench. At times, he even feels sultry. At times, he locks my gaze, and I cannot look away. Also, the transformation is real clever and would be a highlight if it held together better in vehicle mode. This is going to become a mantra, but this figure absolutely is not worth the undiscounted Premier Edition retail price. But I got him on sale, and his bot mode qualities have managed to challenge his massive vehicular structural deficiencies. Anyway, this has been Internet Personality Vangelus, and this dangerous dreadbot, this locked away bad boy, when he asks the question, he gets what he wants. When he looks you in the eye and croons, "Would you like some making fun?"